Hi, fourth graders. This is Miss Day, and I will be giving you guys a read aloud each day. So make sure to go to the Heights webpage so that you can get each chapter for our read aloud book, The Revolutionary War. I'm going to pause the video, or I want you to pause the video at some point so that you can read some parts on your own and report back to your teacher. Let's get started. This is going to be the first part where I'm going to ask you to pause and read Bringing History to Life on your own, and also scan the table of contents. Be thinking about what genre this text is. A New Start in America, setting the scene. The colonies expanded quickly as businesses found success in the new continent. In the early 17th century, English colonists began settling in North America. Most came to find land and work. They hoped to become successful and wealthy. One of their goals was to expand westward, where land and opportunities were plentiful. So colonists are the name of the individuals who came all the way overseas to come try and find a new life in America. Slavery was legal in America at the time. It played an important role in the growth of the colonies, especially in the South. By the mid-18th century, the settlers had established 13 colonies along North America's Atlantic coast. The colonists were British. They were subjects of Great Britain under the king. Colonists were expected to follow the laws that Parliament made in England. This means that anybody who came to America still had to follow the British law all the way back in Great Britain. In 1754, war broke out between France and Great Britain for control of North America. Both sides had Native American allies. The American colonists fought alongside Great Britain. Great Britain won the conflict, known both as the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War. The victory cost Britain huge sums of money and created the problem of having to govern and protect new lands they won from France. The French and Indian War was a long and bloody conflict. So right away we've learned that now what is the United States now is controlled by Great Britain across the Atlantic Ocean. We're going to start with Chapter 1, Seeds of Rebellion. Britain had to quickly decide how to govern the new land. Colonists were eager to expand westward, but all the land west of the colonies was Indian territory. Violence between Native Americans and British troops and colonists often occurred along the western edge of the colonies. Colonists clashed with Native Americans as they attempted to expand westward. The Proclamation of 1763. Great Britain issued the Proclamation of 1763. The proclamation prevented colonists from settling on Indian land. It also ordered that any colonists currently living on Indian land had to return to colonial soil. All land west of the Appalachian Mountains was proclaimed to be Indian territory. These boundaries were established to halt or stop the flow of American settlers west until Britain could set up a new form of government for the recently acquired lands. Many colonists were unhappy with Britain's decision to limit their movements. They believed Britain did not have the right to sovereignty in North America. Sovereignty means power to rule. So a lot of people who were living in America got upset because they couldn't be making their own decisions. Too many taxes. Taxes are just extra money that you have to pay for something. For example, when you go to the store, you have to pay a little bit extra that goes towards taxes or towards the government. To pay off its war debt, Great Britain began taxing the American colonies to raise money. The colonists believed the British did not have this right. Great Britain argued that it did hold this sovereign right in the American colonies. Britain had imposed taxes throughout all of its colonial holdings. It assumed it could do so in its American colonies. In 1764, Parliament issued the Plantation Act, also known as the Sugar Act. This act placed a high duty on sugar and molasses imported from non-British merchants. The colonists would be forced to purchase all their sugar and molasses from British merchants. In 1765, Parliament issued the Stamp Act. Although stamp acts were common in Britain, it angered colonists. The act placed a tax on almost all printed papers, including newspapers, legal documents, and certain kinds of books. These papers could not be issued or sold without special stamps purchased from the British government. How would you be feeling right now if you were living in America and you had to pay all of these taxes to a country that's way across the ocean? How would you be feeling if you were an American colonist right now? Pause and write it down so you can tell your teacher. Colonists had no voice in Britain's government because they were not allowed to vote in British elections. They argued it was unfair for them to be taxed without representation. Many colonists refused to pay for stamps. Others burned stamps, rioted, and threatened British workers in charge of selling the stamps. Colonial merchants began refusing to purchase goods from British merchants. British merchants protested to Parliament that the Stamp Act was harming their business. In 1766, Parliament repealed, or that means took back, the tax. But it issued a new act on the same day. The Declaratory Act stated that British government had the power to tax and make laws for the colonies whenever and however it wished. So even though the British took away these taxes, they made sure that the American colonists knew who was in charge and who made the decisions. That all happened over in Great Britain. In 1767, Parliament issued new acts placing duties or more taxes on imported goods such as glass, paper, and tea. These acts and several others were known as the Townshend Acts. British officers soon were stationed at colonial ports to make sure the duties were paid. Colonists began smuggling goods, such as tea, into the country so they did not have to pay the duties. I'm going to pause it right here, pause your screen, so that you can read A View from Abroad. The Boston Massacre. In 1768, 4,000 British troops were sent to Boston, Massachusetts. Tensions grew between the colonists and the soldiers. Tension just means that two groups of people are disagreeing, the British and the Americans. On March 5, 1770, a barber's apprentice named Edward Garrick was sent to collect payment owed by a British officer. When Garrick arrived at the British offices, a guard refused to let him in. The two began arguing and soon drew attention of nearby colonists. American colonists were subject, that means they were under, to the laws of British Parliament. The colonists joined in the argument and dared the guard to shoot at them. More British soldiers arrived and tried to break up the growing crowd. The colonists menaced at the soldiers and hurled objects at them. One of the British soldiers heard someone yell, "Fire!" The confused soldier raised his gun and pulled the trigger, thinking that his captain had shouted the order. Other soldiers heard the shot and began firing their weapons as well. 5 people were killed and 9 others were injured. The Boston Massacre was seen as a brutal attack by many colonists. Pause the video and read a first-hand look at the Boston Massacre. The Boston Tea Party. Parliament repealed most of the Townshend Acts, that means they took back all of the taxes, on the day of the Boston Massacre. But the British left the tea duty in place to maintain the principle that Parliament had the right to tax the colonists. A major London tea supplier called the East India Company lost a lot of business when Americans stopped purchasing its tea. By 1773, the company had 17 million pounds, 7.7 million kilograms of unsold tea in its warehouses. Usually the company grew its tea in India and shipped it to England. British tea merchants purchased this tea and shipped it to America, where they sold it at higher prices. In May 1773, Parliament changed this system with the Tea Act. The Tea Act allowed the East India Company to sell its tea directly to the colonists. The goal of the act would be to help the company's business and allow Americans to buy tea at lower prices. It would also hurt smuggling in the area, a major problem for the British, because the Tea Act made British tea cheap and easy to get. The colonists, however, saw the Tea Act as yet another example of Great Britain's taxing without the right to do so. By the time news of the act reached America, 7 East India Company ships were already on their way to Boston. Samuel Adams was among the colonial leaders who wanted to prevent the company from selling its tea. So right now, some of the colonists are getting upset because things are still taxed like tea. So they have to pay more money to the government of Britain without having any voting or rights to change these laws. He realized that by accepting the tea, Americans would also be accepting Parliament's right to tax the colonists. He and a group of rebels called the Sons of Liberty began planning a protest. The ships began arriving in Boston Harbor in late November. The Sons of Liberty guarded the ships so they could not be unloaded. The Sons of Liberty tried to convince British officials to send the ships back, but the officials refused. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists dressed as Mohawk Indians snuck into the harbor and threw the crates of tea into the water. Take a pause and read yesterday's headlines. Tomorrow we're going to start Chapter 2, The War Begins. So where we left off here are the American colonists are getting really upset and angry about all of the British rules and taxes that they're putting over them. What do you think is going to be happening next? How do you think the American colonists are feeling? Make sure to come back tomorrow to read Chapter 2 with me. Bye.